If you spend the next 30 days doing nothing but what I'm about to show you, you can scale your editing skills, client list, income, and your lead quality. It is such a beast, in fact, that if you were to master this skill, it would put you ahead of 99% of other editors on the market. So today in this video, I'm going to show you how to use it. I'm going to break down how it works, and I'm also going to be going through different examples showing how it's being used to generate tens of thousands of dollars in new revenue for not only just myself, but for other editors as well. But first, what is this thing and why is it so flipping powerful? Well, the reason it's so powerful is because of this. Have you ever been scrolling on Instagram or Twitter or YouTube and you'll see someone talk about how they make so much money as an editor? So whether that be like $1,000 per short or $10,000 per video, and you'll always just wonder, how do they make so much more money, but they take just as long, if not even faster, to finish a video than me? Well, that's because as they move on in their editing career, they start to build something up called leverage. Now, I use this term quite a lot, but I need to fully explain it to you to understand why you're going to need leverage throughout this entire video and why you're going to need to build leverage throughout your entire editing career. What leverage is, it's essentially something that you use to yield greater results for less effort. So imagine this. Imagine that there was this heavy weight that you had to lift off the floor for whatever reason, but it was too heavy for you to lift by yourself. So what you would do in this case is that you would use leverage to make sure that you can lift the heavy weight very easily and without a lot of effort. So let's say you'd add this plank and this pivot in the middle where it starts swinging like a bit of a seesaw and the weight starts to change. Now with the plank and pivot in place, you can start to lift the weight with less effort because the plank and pivot actually multiply your efforts, which in return will multiply your yield. And your yield is basically just like how much you get in return. And leverage can be created through all sorts of different things, right? Leverage is created by some kind of tool that'll help you to move that stuff. So for example, leverage could be a framework or a preset, or it could be a template, or it could be a system that you build. So for example, if you were to edit very, very slowly and you didn't know how to get faster, you would start creating or you'd start using other people's presets to make sure your editing gets faster so you don't have to constantly create new effects. And next thing you know is that in the same 10 hours that you would have edited usually, you can actually bang out 3 times more videos in the span of a month. And that is leverage. Having presets is leverage. But now let's actually zoom out for a bit and take a look at the entire picture of the entire editing market. And now we have to ask ourselves, how can I gain more leverage so I start to earn more money without actually having to work more, so I can start getting higher paying jobs, more exciting jobs, and I don't have to do any more effort? What you're seeing on screen right now is called the logarithmic curve. This is essentially the curve of progression. So you can see at the beginning here, we have this small jump in, and that's when everybody starts out editing. You see, there's a bunch of tools and resources online for beginner editors to use. So for example, we have my beginner guide. That's like 11, 12 hours. After watching that, you'll just jump up immediately. You'll start making a couple $100s per month, or perhaps you'll make your first 1K month off the bat. And that'll help you to progress so much at the beginning. And the reason why there's so much progression at the beginning is because you have nothing. You have the entire world of editing to learn about. So it's obvious that one bit of information will introduce so much about the concept of editing or why you do it or what's the goal and stuff. But then as time passes, it becomes harder and harder to gain that leverage. And this is kind of where most people quit because they start to yield the kind of average results. You know, they'll start to make 2-3K per month. They'll think, do you know what? That's it for me. There's nothing I can do with this knowledge. I've made the maximum. I've become the best. There's nothing more I can do. But they don't realize that with just a bit more effort, they could actually be yielding the greatest results. You see, how the logarithmic curve works isn't the same way as you think it would. People usually think that as you progress by 2% tiny bit more over this big span, you would have to do a lot of work. And through that lot of work, you don't get to make a lot more money. You don't get to have a lot less time. You don't get to work on better videos. But that's actually not true. You see, because the way that logarithmic curves work in terms of effort, it actually flips over and inverses in terms of results and in terms of yield. So it looks like this. In the way that we would have a logarithmic curve for effort, we actually have an exponential curve for results. So as time goes on, the people that make the tiniest bits of progress with hours upon hours of effort, they actually make a lot more money than the people who don't put in that 2% or don't put in that extra 1% better every day or every month. And it actually works the same in any domain of business or any discipline in life. So let me give you a few examples. So the people that make the least in the US would be the minimum wage workers, and they probably make about like $1,000 or $2,000 per month at the most. And then the absolute richest are the ones that make billions upon billions, and they don't have to work longer hours because they have all these systems, they have all this leverage to use to make more money. So let's take another example here. Let's take a look at sports. Now, the person who has the lowest net worth in the NBA is Sean Kemp with a $5 million net worth. And the person with the highest net worth in the NBA is... And that's because LeBron James has a lot more leverage, right? He's got like a $1.2 billion net worth, right? So he's worth a lot of money, and that's because he has the most amount of leverage. His name holds a lot more weight than a guy like Sean Kemp, which you don't even know who he is. Another analogy is in the Premier League. So we have football here, and the person that makes the least amount of money is this guy called Kelleher. He's a goalkeeper. He makes about £6,000 a week, which is, I think, around $7,000 or $8,000 a week. Compare that to the person who makes the most amount of money in the Premier League. That's Erling Haaland, who makes about $600,000 a week. And the reason why Haaland makes so much more money, except he spends the exact same amount of time in training, he spends the exact same amount of caloric energy in training, is because he has a lot more leverage. You know, he scores a lot of goals. He works very hard. He's very strong. He's very fast. He's very young. And all of these things are stats that he can use to leverage more money out of big clubs to play for. And if you take a look at any chart, you'll see that income or money or anything to do with money includes leverage. And leverage will always look like this. The returns will always be exponential. It'll never be linear. It'll always be exponential. So what you want to do is you want to start building leverage that beats others in the market. You need to realize that editing is pretty competitive, and you do need to beat your friends if you want to yield more returns. So anything to get faster, anything to get smarter without having to use more effort is always going to help you build leverage. You want to show off that you can actually do more for the creators and more for the prospects than other editors can. Which leads me to my second point, which is your relationship with clients. So creators generally want to feel like they're special. You know, they want to feel like this editor that's working for them is only going to ever want to work with them. They want to be there until the end. They want to continuously work with them, build something good. And that's because most editors that get paid the most are usually the most reliable ones. So when you're working with your clients, always try to build goodwill. Ask them questions about their content, see how you can do better for them. Don't be afraid to do some free tasks every now and then. Obviously, don't take on extra services like start to do their shorts or reformat their shorts. If they want your input, or if they want some help on something, or if they need you to quickly do something, or if you can hire a thumbnail designer for them, always helps. Doing revisions, doing trials for free, this kind of free work builds goodwill. And over time, as you begin to learn more about the creator and the mind of the creator, you start to make better work. And that better work will obviously yield more results when you're trying to land other clients. And once this client starts to realize that you know what you're doing, they'll make recommendations for you without you even asking. They'll start to plant the seed that'll eventually grow and bring you new business to which you can start charging them higher prices, and you'll start making like twice the money before you even realize it. And this one actually kind of leads me to my next point, because it's very important to know about what your clients want, what you need to do to help them get there, and how you can press on that enough for them to pay you more money. So we actually need to learn how to get there, how to do that, and how to do that every single time with ease, so it's not very difficult to do. So then that way you can make the best work without having to constantly think. So that leads me to number 3, which is to build frameworks. A framework is essentially just this structured way of thinking so that you don't have to constantly think about what you have to do when you're editing. And I know that a lot of editors have this, where they have to constantly think of new ideas and they don't know how to be creative or how to create constant creativity and new novel ideas for themselves to attract new clients, or just perhaps make better videos for their current clients. But essentially a framework will just help you to reduce the thinking part and just make everything step by step automated. And once you know what works, you can just build frameworks around what works. These different kinds of methods of of thinking, understanding how viewers work, understanding how YouTube works, understanding what editing is. And just generally, once you do that, you'll build a framework and you don't even have to think. And then once you do that, you'll become faster and faster and faster. And as that yields more results for your clients, you then use those results to leverage it, because it's leveraged now, to help you land better and new clients. And remember what I said earlier is that when you're already getting results for your current clients, they're going to start telling, other creators about you so that you can start getting a new business. Eventually, just over time, this will just stack on top of each other to the point where you're getting constant inbounds. An example of this is one of the editors that I coach. He was using the frameworks that I showed him and I taught him, and he was telling me about how he was using them in these videos, and they started getting better retention than usual. The views were higher and people were loving it. Generally, the video just worked out better for him in total. That obviously reciprocated with the client. Other prospects started to see the value in his work to the point where when he was getting DMs, he would be like, yeah, I'm worth $1,000. And they'd be like, yes. Or if they didn't say yes, then they'd just be like, yeah, I understand that. Like, I can't afford it, but I understand that. So we can see this actually works and builds out already. And the best part, he didn't even have to do it himself because he just used the frameworks that I've been using for my clients for the past 5 years. And you can see Brandon here, he was also using those exact same frameworks on visual storytelling and also just narrative storytelling to the point where he was getting higher retention rates for his clients. And then he leveraged that to get himself a job with AMP. And he's now doing videos for them and he's doing great. So you can see that these things work. And if you want to use those same frameworks that these guys have used to yield greater results in their editing business, then there's going to be a link below where you can talk to me just for a bit. We can talk a bit about your editing, and generally, if I think you're fit for it, then we can move forward into giving you those frameworks. But if you're not interested in that, then that's fine, because I can show you what you can do next. And that leads me to my next step, which is to research. So research, if you don't already know it, it's just a structured way of finding those answers. And once you find those answers of how to make better videos, and then you start creating frameworks on how to actually make those better videos in software, and then you get those results, then you can start. But if you haven't booked a call yet and you just want to build your own frameworks, then either go do that now, or we can just move on to this next step, which is starting off with learning about the absolute best in the world. Now, it's very easy to go and copy your neighbors, to go and copy the guy next to you, to use the methods of steal like an artist. The problem with that is that you're copying from other people who don't actually know what they're doing. And the best in the world are usually the undisputed champions of their respective domains. So let's just take a look at this analogy of sports. So if we take football, Messi and Ronaldo are greater than all of their other peers by a margin. And if we would take away those two, then finding out the greatest of all time will be a bit of a struggle. And if you were to take a look at YouTube, Mr. Beast is second to none. And we all know that because, Mr. Beast's name is just grown so big. He's got 400 million subscribers, and people in number 2 have 100 million or something like that. So he's obviously the biggest channel on YouTube. Therefore, let's take a look at what his editors are doing. And we can even go beyond that, because do you think that Mr. Beast editors are just researching themselves? No. I mean, probably, but they don't stop there. They've adopted something called multidisciplinary thinking, which is essentially when you start to look at other domains, other, champions of domains, other best in the world of other domains and disciplines. So for example, they would start looking at people in film, people in art, people in probably interior design. They probably look at the weirdest stuff and they just see what is it that we have to do to actually really get people engaged and really get people involved. How can we start adopting new ways of thinking to start making our editing much, much better? And I've also done this myself, and I can definitely say from experience that I've yielded some of the craziest results just from looking at other disciplines and how they think. So I've looked at films, I've looked at oil painters, I've looked at, music artists and music producers. I've gone to graphic designers, I've gone to pixel designers, I've spoken to game developers, just to learn about how they think in their domains. And you can also just research all this stuff. You don't actually have to meet people and, build a brand and network with them, but you can just search this stuff up. So for example, plenty of my work is inspired from these university papers that I've gathered from just sheer research. And then I'll take the median of those results and I would realize, oh, so this is how people react to sound. Oh, okay, so then you're telling me when I do this, paired with this, followed by this, it'll create this effect. I see. So this is how they'd respond to that, right? And that has made editing so much easier for me, because now I can create easy, followed, step-by-step frameworks where I don't have to think. and the viewers don't have to think. You're gonna start building this diverse brain. You see, the problem with what you're currently thinking is that the people that you see on YouTube, the other editing gurus and stuff, they usually give you this very prescribed version of editing. I've definitely seen a lot of editors who learn strictly from storytelling and filmmaking, and you know, I've been to uni myself. I've studied the same things they do, and that knowledge can only take you so far. And I've also spoken to a lot of editors that are very like business oriented. You know, they don't take a look at films. They don't take a look at, you know, different filmmakers and directors and film editors. They just think about business and how to land clients and stuff. And you know, that's great too, but that can only take you so far. Because once you start to adopt this multidisciplinary thinking, is that you can learn about the principles and the sheer fundamentals of them. And I'm not just using big words to, you know, to sound smart and stuff, but generally, if you understand how things work, then you will be able to make a video and know exactly how people are going to react. And that's helped me receive like crazy bonuses in pay for my clients. And it's not just me, there are also editors in my program that I'm teaching who essentially use this same multidisciplinary thinking to start creating new ideas for their work, or to start pitching it to their own clients or to new prospects, and that'll help them make more money, and that'll also help them create better work. But you can see how it's benefiting, you know, other editors to start thinking outside the box and start to really put themselves ahead of so many other editors. And ultimately, at the end of all of this, once you start to repeatedly do this, and once you start to repeatedly gain more leverage in your work, you become completely indispensable. You know, people start to study your work. As you start to study other disciplines, people will look at you and think, what is he doing so differently? And creators will do the same thing, and that's when they start like interviewing you. That's when they start saying, can you do this, that, and the other, and they'll become so impressed with your mind that just your thinking alone will cost them an extra like $1,000 per video, just because you have that much leverage. I understand that $1,000 is quite a lot of money for a lot of editors to hit, but you know, like I said earlier, is that I'm coaching a lot of editors, and this kind of result comes to them very, very easily. Most editors don't really know how to get there. So if you do want to have some help like these guys, and if you do want to start getting results just like these guys, then again, my offer's on the table. The link is right down there. You can just book a call, and you and I can talk for a bit about your editing situation and how we can get you there. And you can also see the frameworks that I use to, you know, get those results for my clients. So if you'd like some help, then the link is right there. I'd love to talk to you, but apart from that, have a good day.